perspective. Well, if you think about it, think about other people in the Bible who suffered. Let's start back with Abel. Remember, Abel suffered at the hands of Cain. Why did Abel suffer at the hands of Cain? Because his deeds were righteous and his brother Cain's were evil, and Cain envied Abel, and therefore he slew him. So what does that say about the suffering that came upon Abel? It was God's design to show that Abel believed God, that Cain envied him, and so it shows Cain's wickedness, it shows Abel's righteousness, and it justifies Abel because he believed God. God justified him, considered him righteous for Christ's sake, and God justified him in showing that in that suffering he was approved of God and Cain was not. And so in that sense, it shows the one who was approved of God actually suffered and died, where the one who was disapproved didn't. Remember, Cain said, after God said, you're going to be banished, you're going to be gone out, and you're going to have a mark set on you. Everyone that finds you, Cain said, everyone that finds me is going to want to kill me. And he says, my suffering is greater than I can bear. Well, I always wonder, what do you mean your suffering is greater than you can bear? So anyway, that shows you that. But think on a little bit further in the Scripture. Think about Joseph, for example. I like to think about Joseph. Here's a man who didn't seem to do anything wrong. I mean, you might argue that he told his dreams to his brothers, and he was somewhat boastful and maybe not wise in doing that. But I can't tell whether he was or not. I mean, it's kind of like what Jesus said to the people who accused him. He said, if I don't tell you the truth, then I'll be a liar like you. And Joseph was simply telling them what God had showed him in a dream. He says, one day, the sun, the moon, the stars all bowed down to me. And that was a revelation that God, you might not like it, but that was what God said. And so they hated the messenger because of the message. And so they took him, and wickedly, they envied him because his father loved him and preferred him even above his brethren. They took him and they put him in a pit. They thought to kill him. They put him in a pit. They sold him as a slave to Egypt. And what did he say at the end of all that? What did Joseph say? He said, you meant it for evil, but what did God design it for? For good. And why? How? To save much people alive. So the sufferings of Christ at the hands of men, as Joseph's sufferings, were designed for good, to save much people alive, you see. And so we can go on. Now, if you look on further in the Scripture, even the nation of Israel is seen to suffer in the book of Jeremiah. And the book of Jeremiah is a very interesting book. If you start reading it, it kind of becomes, it's like one of those novels you can't quite put down. You might find it hard to think of the Bible that way sometimes, but the book of Jeremiah is talking about the nation of Judah, that entity Judah, where the capital was Jerusalem, and they were really the leftovers of the 12 tribes of Israel. The 10 tribes had already been taken away, and they had seen that. Judah had seen that, and they knew the reason God had taken Israel away, because the Assyrians came and swooped down on them, took them away, and it was because of their idolatry, because they forsook the Lord. And Judah was exactly the same way, and God tells them throughout the book of Jeremiah all about their wickedness. And he compares them in the most graphic terms in their wickedness to an unfaithful wife who went out and committed adultery everywhere. And God, as the husband, says graciously to her, to the nation then, he says, even though you've committed adultery, and even though I have divorced you because of that, he says, yet I say to you, return to me. And then he says, in fact, let me just look at a couple of verses just to show you God's goodness to the people. Then turn to Jeremiah, Jeremiah chapter, around verse, well, let's just pick a few verses at a venture here. Jeremiah chapter 1. Look at Jeremiah chapter 1. And you see here in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 16, God says, and I will utter my judgments against them touching all their wickedness, who have forsaken me and have burned incense unto other gods, and worshipped the works of their own hands. That's what idolatry is. It's worshiping the works of your own hands. And that's why God hates it. That's why God hated the Pharisees in the New Testament and gave them the sternest, woe, woe, woe unto you, Pharisees, and all these things, because they worship the works of their own hands. And then he says, you can see how the people treated God. Look at chapter 2, verse 5. Chapter 2, verse 5, he says, Thus saith the Lord, What iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they are gone far from me, and have walked after vanity, and are become vain? Look at verse 11, same chapter. Hath a nation changed their gods, which are yet no gods? But my people have changed their glory for that which does not profit. See, what he's saying there is that the nations who serve idols, they don't forsake their idols, but you've forsaken the Lord, your glory. And that's what he says in verse 13. He says, For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and they've hewed out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. And you can see this goes throughout, the whole case that God makes against them throughout this book. But look over at chapter 3 a little bit further. He says, well, we could read, and I would encourage you to read the first few verses here in chapter 3. But look what it says here in verse, I'm going to read the first 6 verses, even though it's graphic. He says here, They say, if a man put away his wife, and she go from him, and become another man's, shall he return to her again? Shall not that land be greatly polluted? But thou hast played the harlot with many lovers. Yet return unto me, return again to me, saith the Lord. And then he goes on. Look at verse 7. And I said, after she had done all these things, turn thou unto me. But she returned not.